Well, I think it's going to be, I told them it might be hard just to get building owners relocated. They're going to have to do a liability coverage. And then if they have to do that, I don't think they're going to be.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order a special meeting of the City Council Tuesday, February 5th at 5:30. Roll call, please.
Mr. Simmons? Here. Mr. Buttacavoli? Here. Ms. McKenzie? Here. Mr. Hudson?
Here.
Mr. Samayoa?
Here. Thank you. Do you want to leave the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of our regular meeting, if that's all right, folks? So, let's move to, we have one item discussion. Again, this is kind of a continuation for the next few meetings where staff have worked really hard on putting together information for the councils so it increase our capacity on what's going on. And this study session is coming from our fire department and emergency services. And I imagine Chief Carlin will be speaking. You're on, sir, unless there's a presentation from, okay, go ahead.
Just really quickly, I just wanted to make a few introductory remarks before Chief Carlin gives his presentation. The point of tonight's study session really is just to have a substantive discussion about the current status of the fire department, its future needs and demands, and start thinking about those priorities moving forward as we move into the budget season, and then take some comment from the council. And of course, at the time when we start developing the budget, we'll be coming back very likely with some recommendations that we've prioritized based on your comments, and also based on, of course, the fire chief's experience with his staff in the fire department. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chief Carlin.
So good evening, Mayor and council members. It's a privilege and honor to be standing here tonight before you and amongst my colleagues and peers. In 7 months' time, it feels like it's almost been 7 years in dog years terms, but I've been able to glean a lot of information and detail that we felt was important to deliver to the council to update you on where our current status is and some of the struggles that we're currently having today. So just as a snapshot of our status and trends, over a 3-year period, we took some numbers of our call stats. And as you look at the calls, the total incident numbers haven't fluctuated too tremendously. However, if you shift over to the right there where we call an overlapping incident, you can see the trends there climbing each year. Until last year, we were up to 374 calls, which means those are overlapping calls that happen simultaneously or within a time frame. Our current engine is already on a call, and so another call happens and we don't go to that call. So it's been quite alarming to see that number trending up. And as I met with Marty, that was kind of one of the first things that stuck out to me, is like, I'm going to medical aid calls as a fire chief to try and augment the resources we don't have. So it's kind of taking my time up to respond to calls, which are a priority, and then not being able to do some of that management type work that I should be doing. So that's important. We just did stats today for our CM monthly report. Last month we had 40 concurrent calls alone for January. Today is a great day to talk about, because before 10 o'clock this morning we had 6 calls for service. 3 of those were in mode of being overlapping calls where we didn't get to those calls even this morning, multiple times over this morning. So it's a theme that keeps happening. The numbers are getting bigger, alarming. It's to a point where we need to start figuring out how to address that through how we operate. So we look at some of the other trends. That averaged out last year call volumes to 8.2 calls per day. And by 4 o'clock today, we hit 8 calls already by today. So you can just kind of get a perspective of what the guys do during a day. They spend most of the day going to calls. 80% of those were medical aid calls last year. And again, like we talked about, the fluctuations in numbers, not greatly of any notice, but the concurrent calls are. Some of the big things we experienced recently, we just a few weeks ago had a double fatal fire where 2 people perished in a fire. So when you think like small town Marysville wouldn't have large event things going on, we do. We most recently had, even as early as last week, had a double fatal accident on 70. I was there. We didn't have enough crews on scene to handle that in the most effective, efficient way. It was a head-on accident, and we called mutual aid right away for assistance from Gridley, CAL FIRE. And when the crews arrived on scene, there was one person trapped in a vehicle. There was a critical patient, another patient that was trapped in a separate car who appeared to be minor in the beginning, but we had to tell her, like, hold on, man, we'll get to you here shortly. Just stay calm and we'll be with you. And so it took us about 20 minutes to extricate the critical care patient while the other person didn't crumple on us, but that's always a case where it could happen. And so being out there, we don't have enough resources to even handle 2 separate patients to extricate and to give patient care to and get those folks to the hospital where they need that care is a little bit alarming. And as most of you have known, the fatalities we've been having a lot on Highway 70 and 20 has kept us busy. We participated this last year 7 times with the California Master Mutual Aid Assistance Program. So some of those large incidences that occurred this last year were the Carr Fire, the Mendocino Complex, most notably our neighbors to us, the Camp Fire. So we're going to kind of start off with the mothership, talking about our facility, because that's kind of where everything surrounds us and our operations. Constructed in 1959, currently going through a remodel right now because of the flood situations. But I just want to emphasize we're putting $1.7 million back into facelift that existing infrastructure and facility. So we still have existing problems. Just a couple nights ago, the guys went to go to a call and the bay door wouldn't open up because the gear mechanism exploded, basically, and so they couldn't get out that door with the engine, and they had to jump to another one. So even though we're getting a facelift, we still have some infrastructure issues there with that facility. It's considered being a poor location based on today's standards. The first day I rolled in and I noticed that the fire station was located right next to the railroad tracks, and then I saw the Kinder Morgan pipe sign there. I was like, wow, this is great. We're sitting right next to a bomb. So I expressed to Marty, like, this is not a good situation for your public safety facility, who we're supposed to go rescue folks who could potentially be a part of some risk of a catastrophe there with the railroad system, whether it's a derailment, a fire, a hazmat, anything that could be an issue with the pipelines there is all risk associated with us in your public safety facility. It's difficult to get out on B Street. I'm sure most of you have sat at 9th and B there for us during the day. There's times where that intersection gets blocked off with vehicles and we can't easily get through there. So that's a problem with us. Even as simple as the noise from the railroad is a concern to me. Only being there 7 months, I think I have half gone deaf already, because it is very noisy there next to the railroad tracks. You can imagine daily those guys are out there being exposed to that train traffic and the noises. Not to mention they roll all night long. They don't stop at 5 o'clock. Okay, you guys have the evening to yourself. The guys do sleep there. They try to sleep there. And so that railroad track that comes through once an hour wakes them up, and they don't really get a good night rest when they can. And it's not centrally located. Everything, is kind of built out away from where the current station is. So right now we have some response times out to Hall Street, for example, in East Marysville, that are pushing almost 6 minutes, which is past the National Fire Protection Association standards recommended for response times. So there are some real issues there. Some of the solutions that we are exploring, or at least trying to keep on our radar, is how we might be able to relocate that facility. I know that sounds daunting and it won't happen tomorrow, but the way I look at it is if we don't put it on our radar and we don't think about it for the future, and an opportunity comes up or some grant or funds become available where we could make that happen, then we would never think of doing that. And then I have experience with actually putting a fire station and a police department together and building a public safety facility, which to me, after seeing it happen, makes perfectly good sense to put your public safety folks into one facility area where they can commingle and train and communicate much more effective and save on resources to the city and be more cost effective. Then we kind of move into staffing levels. That's probably our biggest issue with our staffing. Currently today we staff 1 engine with 3 people, so we have really no backup for our concurrent call issues. We still have a little bit of the volunteer program left, but as you can imagine, most of those folks that we do have there work during the day, so they're not really available to us to come in and help augment additional calls or additional equipment needed for calls. And so our biggest issue obviously is our EMS calls, and that'll become important later on as we talk about some other things. But that's where we're trying to drill into what is the real issues, the problems out there that we're going to be faced with, and that's our EMS calls going unanswered from the fire side. No management position, so I'm it. When I get into a heated conversation, I turn around and look at myself and I try and answer it. Or I go over to Chris Sachs's office and try and have him, tell me what I should think about. But I have no staff to turn to, so when projects come in or projects need to be done, or Marty comes to me and asks me, can we do these 5 or 6 or 100 things, I don't have anybody else I can just shovel off to and go, absolutely, we could do those things. So it is a little bit daunting, not that I'm not up to the challenge, but it's something we need to consider. After going through a few disciplinary things in our department, it became pretty obvious that we also needed another layer of some management position in there to help kind of manage these personnel issue things. So we always kind of refer back to the industry standards or National Fire Protection Association when we're trying to gauge, like you would ask me, like, how many fire folks do we need? And I would not say I don't know. These are standards that we could go to that a fire department can kind of gauge themselves against to see how they rate. Are they meeting the standards? For example, for NFPA, this is kind of a big standard out there, but they would say based on all their findings and their testing that it takes 14 firefighters on scene of a residential house structure fire to mitigate that emergency. And that's typically what we respond to as residential house fires. So 14 folks, getting them to an incident, that could be paid career, volunteer, interns, it could be any types of bodies, but bodies showing up at an incident. So that's a pretty steep standard that we probably couldn't meet, but it's something that we should be trying to strive to work towards and getting somewhere close to that. And then the other big issue that we're dealing with today is recruitment and retention of our employees. So I'm recruiting for a fire inspector position currently, and it's been a struggle based on the salary and trying to convince someone to come to Marysville and join our program. I've had folks testing out, trying to figure out ways to keep those people engaged and keep them retained after we have invested in them. So some of our staffing solutions would include assessing and exploring options of hiring more appropriate staff, whether it's line staff, management staff, to meet the demands of the calls, and especially to handle that concurrent call issues that we have. And we've done some studies to try and drill into, like, is there a time period of, concurrent calls happen during this? Yes, we have. And it's from about 5 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night. So it's not a very convenient, like, oh, from 8 to 5, we could just address this issue and hire more folks during that time period, because it does shift, to a larger span of time. Looking at augment career staff with interns reserves, also, reducing our expenses and our costs, our overhead costs. And I believe that we could put together a model by hiring some more folks. It's kind of that adage of, spending money to get money. So if we were to be able to hire and put more staff on, we could potentially reduce our overtime expenses. So there's a little bit of our savings and not just completely expending dollars that we would never get a benefit for. Also consider hiring a minimum a battalion chief officer level for management and oversight to help that load. And if we're going to explore and look at other opportunities like revenue generating things, I can only do so much. And so I'm trying to tackle many different things. Having another management position would help me be more successful. Then we move into our fire apparatus, our fleet. It is aging, we have maintenance issues, and it's high cost and a lot of time spent trying to locate outdated parts or build parts. I sent Marty a text this afternoon because actually one of our fire trucks caught on fire. It's kind of that embarrassing moment, like, who puts out the fire truck fire? We did. So it was one of our engines that's 36 years old, and they were out doing a weekly on it, and the pump just caught on fire. So they were able to put it out, it's got some damage, and now we got to spend more money to get that up and running here in the future. Most of it's outdated. Like I say, a lot of our equipment is over 30 years old. We have one good frontline engine, but the rest of that behind it is really aged old. I mean, we have old hand-me-down CAL FIRE stuff that they purged after 20 plus years, kind of equipment stuff that really needs to be looked at and addressed. The downtime has increased and parts are difficult to find. So every time we take a fire truck out of service, that's one more piece of equipment that we don't have available for if downtown catches on fire and we need multiple pumpers available to fight that fire, every time we take apparatus out of service, it just depletes our available resources to us. Our first out engine, like I said, is 10 years old. It's been beat up. It's had an engine replaced and 2 front ends replaced. Has over 86,000 miles on it, which is high miles for fire engine status. And so we're at a point where that engine, in order to save it, we need to push it back to a reserve status and replace it with a new one so that we can keep this engine for a longer period of time. So we created an equipment replacement fund, which was kind of a unique and kind of a first start for us, to put some funds in there to start thinking about how to replace equipment. And most of that fund that's been put in there so far has been from strike team revenues that we've generated for the purpose of equipment replacement. So we got a very small kitty started, and then we'll start doing bake sales and, you know, anything else we could do, car washes, to keep adding funds to that.
Calendars?
Calendars. Chris is going to do a calendar for us. He's got some great ideas on some revenue things for us. So a new engine, just, you know, that sticker shock factor is about $750,000. And that's actually taken a huge increase over the last 6 months because of the tariffs that were put in place for getting aluminum and things. They jumped up from $50,000 to $100,000 just from that simple implementation of tariffs that have gone in place. So now we get to see that effect as well. And so that's kind of why we're also talking tonight too, is just talking about, you know, for us, the fire department is one of your largest ticketed items of expenses. So, you know, we have to creatively find ways to get around this. And also just the delayed response times with, you know, the old outdated stuff that may or may not start, may catch on fire, may not be able to go to the call. It's not our desire to have a delayed response when somebody's having a heart attack. Some of the solutions, one is we need to replace that current structure first line engine that we have. Something to keep in mind is if we were to place an order tomorrow, it takes about 1 year to build that engine. So when we're talking about planning, we're already behind the curve. I need an engine today, but if I got a green light tomorrow, I wouldn't see that engine for a year. So that's why it's important to plan out and, you know, giving green lights, knowing the anticipation that we've got a year. There are many options with purchasing. You can wait a year before you put money down. You can do lease purchase options. There are lots of things we can look at on how we could pay for something like that. My second priority is to purchase what we call a quick attack unit. It's a smaller unit. Relative to price, it's about $200,000, so much cheaper unit. But I have this plan, believe it or not, where I would like to hire more people and put them in this small quick attack unit and have them respond to all the medical aids. So it saves the wear and tear on our larger, more expensive engine, and it keeps 2 vehicles available for those concurrent calls. And so that's a way we can reduce costs, be more effective, more efficient over time by purchasing a smaller unit like that. Also, we have a wildland fleet of engine resources, and they are very old. It's something else we need to look at replacing. I would like to downsize the fleet. I do feel that we have way too many fire trucks in our fleet. And so if we're able to downsize, we have a few vehicles that need a bunch of tires replaced. They're old equipment, and I could spend about $14,000 tomorrow in replacing tires. I really don't want to do that when I feel like I could probably start trying to downsize the fleet, save those dollars, put them towards a more legitimate purchase towards an engine, and then just reduce the fleet. So we've got less maintenance time, less insurance, less to maintain and operate. We're also looking at, we have applied for an AFG grant for a new engine. I'd love to say we're going to get that, but realistically, we probably won't. If we get it, it'll be a miracle, and we'll all celebrate. But we're also looking at some more realistic options. Another option we're exploring is the USDA Rural Grant Program, which we got some phone calls in to find more out about it, but it might be a better way for us to purchase and spread out a loan payment over some years to do like a once a year loan payments at a smaller amount versus just putting $750,000 up front. So there's many financing options out there, and with our wonderful finance director, Jennifer, she's going to help us find creative ways to make something magical happen. She's assured us. And then we have equipment items. A lot of these are due for replacement, such as our self-contained breathing apparatus, what we wear in our backs when we go into structure fires. Some of those have actually timed out. We've reached out to Linda, who actually had some spare ones, and we're borrowing some of that equipment. So it's a little, hard to ask your neighbor if you can borrow a very used daily piece of equipment that's something we should be up on and replacing regularly. Our radio equipment is outdated. Our portables, our Motorola radios in our vehicles are all outdated. We have an inability to communicate in a current structure with our law enforcement counterparts. So when we get into one of these active shooter scenarios or a violent scenario thing where we can't communicate with each other. So we have some weaknesses there and some outdated equipment that we need to look at replacing.
Chief?
Yes.
The scuba, is that for going into the fire area, or is
Yep.
that aquatic scuba?
No, actually, there's a picture of it up there. That's
Oh,
the
I
one, the
didn't see
lower
it. I
picture
see
there.
it,
So
yeah.
it's that bottle thing we wear on our back, has air in it, and then we go on air when we go into that structure. And then our communication infrastructure, it's old, it's antiquated, we have some issues there. As I was out there in that vehicle accident on 70 the other day, I could not talk to dispatch. I had to try like 6 times in order for them to piece together some of the words to understand what I was saying. And so it's frustrating in those situations where you've got life and death going on and we can't communicate real well. Granted, it's 7-8 miles out, but that's something that we need to be looking at for the future and how to make our system more robust with communications. And then we have things, extrication tools, fire hose, our personal protective clothing, the gear we wear into the structure fires. We do have a higher percentage of fires in Marysville, as you can imagine. And so those guys are in those turnouts a lot more than an average department is. So we're hard on those things. Some of the solutions to that is to look at full replacement versus program budgeting. So if we go to replace any one of those items, you're looking at $150,000. And so it's hard to come up with that one-time purchase of $150,000 in order to do that. Some of my past experiences, we found it was better and easier and more consistent by doing program budgeting where we split that in thirds and we just manage that over 3 years and spread it out. So it's easier to manage those smaller pricings of those one-time expenditures. And then seeking grant funding, which we did. We put in grants for SCBAs, we put in grants for radio upgrades, and then the engine. So those are 3 things that we are hopeful that we might get something of a win out of those. And then we talk about health and wellness, which quite honestly, in my 30 years, we never talked about back in the early days, but it's one of the biggest issues that we're faced with today, quite honestly. So we're talking about early detection of medical conditions. Because of our stress and the things we're faced with, we do have higher rates of cardiac and heart-related issues. We deal with a lot of stress, like in public safety, and so people don't quite know how to manage that stress, and so we don't teach it in the fire service. We just say, congratulations, welcome aboard, now you're going to go deal with really bad stuff, and good luck. And so we're trying to figure out how does that look now in the fire service with teaching people how to cope with stress, having tools available for people to manage their stress. Physical fitness, very important for us. That's what keeps us healthier and capable of doing our job. Our mental capacity, we're always going to be challenged against that. I suffer tremendously. But there is that PTSD side out there that people are suffering with. A lot higher number in a public safety world with both police and fire today. And we always, at least for me, we always just kind of like, whatever, it's a number, it's not that big, it's not a problem. But today, when we look at statistics where more firefighters died last year of suicide than work-related deaths, we got a problem. And so this is where all this health and wellness needs to come together to promote health and wellness to our firefighters so that they stay strong both physically and mentally through their 30-year career. It's not just a 5-10-year gig. Some of the things we can do to help that, we can look at steps to reduce injury, illness, stress, mental health, and things to create cancer. We just had a small win within our own organization. We have a turnout extractor which cleans our turnouts after they get soiled. So you can imagine after we come back from a structure fire, we're carrying all those carcinogens on our turnouts, and it was living in our restroom, shower, bathroom area. So they had to walk this stuff through the building where they decon in a shower and throw their dirty turnouts in there.
And
Not us. It's them. So during our remodel, we were able to negotiate and figure out a way to move that extractor out to our floor where the fire trucks live and take out that carcinogen component away from our decon space and our living space. And so now when the guys walk off the fire engine, they can walk right over to the extractor, put them in there. Well, that's a big deal. Cancer is a big deal in the fire service today. So that was a win for us to be able to negotiate with the insurance company to demonstrate, you know, upgrading these standards and OSHA regulations today. They bought into it. And so I was prepared to find 10 grand to make this happen. The insurance graciously absorbed this into this remodel, and they are picking up the bill for that. So it's a big win for the city, big win for our firefighters. Doing annual testing has kind of become a new thing for the fire service, where we monitor those levels of cancer. We do testing for cancer, catch stuff early. That way we can take care of those things. Training, there's lots of professional services out there available today to come in and help put us on track and line out programs for us that will help us be successful, whether it's reducing stress, talking about how we eat, or how we should, you know, work out. It's kind of a big deal. There's professionals out there that have those things available for us. Of course, there's additional costs and time associated with those types of things. We talk about dispatching. We talk about doing a comparison and analysis of our NFPA standards and ISO standards. ISO is important to all of the Marysville because it's what drives our insurance rates. So just doing checks and balances and see where we might be able to make improvements anywhere along that dispatching arena. Radio interoperability system issues. You know, we have issues where, you know, police talks on one channel, we talk on another channel. Our system is so antiquated, they can't conjoin and be able to talk together. And so it requires dispatchers to monitor separate radio traffic in that room, trying to figure out, okay, who's talking, fire or police? And they can only talk to one at a time. So there are some upgrades in our systems that we could look at doing to make that a better and safer environment for both our law and our fire folks. Fire-centric training. We feel like we could do a better job with helping dispatchers be better at fire side of dispatching. Generally speaking, dispatchers get law enforcement training. That's the schooling, that's the teaching. And so we could do a better job at trying to help them understand the fire side. It's a disconnect between fire and dispatching because they don't have all the tools they need to be as successful as they could be. And so we think we could help promote doing regular trainings. We do like a one-time, oh, congratulations, you're gonna be a dispatcher, welcome. And we do like an hour thing and then we never see them again. So talking to the chief, we think we could promote some additional ongoing trainings that will help continually educate them and train them to be better fire-centric. And then also we have resources available to us down the road that, for example, Sac Regional has a fire dispatching center.
Say that again?
Sac Regional Metro Fire has dispatching for fire only. And so we feel like we could send those dispatchers down there for a day and watch how they dispatch just for fire and learn some of that language, the lingo, how things go with the fire side of dispatching, which will help them be, you know, better suited and more tools in their toolbox for here. And then just ongoing evaluate our internal policies and procedures for dispatching. It's something that we've tried to reconnect with the dispatching side of things, of be more proactive, talking about protocols, talking about policies and procedures. Some disconnects and miscommunications in the past, so we're trying to clean up things that make it easier for the dispatchers. And so we're not trying to, you know, confuse them or put too many steps in place where they can't, you know, keep up with our changes. We're trying to find ways to, you know, do things methodically and do them in a way that makes sense to dispatchers, because they're more or less programmed to do a job, and we have to fit into how that programming works. So where appropriate and funding is available, we'll try to institute any of the recommendations from NFPA and ISO standards that we find. We'd like to improve and upgrade the software and hardware infrastructures as we find where we can make some of those, but you're talking about large ticket items also, where infrastructure could be a $150,000 upgrade just with radio components within that dispatch center. And enhancing the fire-centric training, like I alluded to, we've got some tools we can give those dispatchers to help them feel more comfortable talking the fire language. And then continue to develop policies and procedures. And then as we look more globally on our counterparts in the county and we're talking about maybe some consolidational potentials out there. A component of that is also regionalizing dispatching for obvious reasons, just having one central location where all of those agencies and resources can communicate through one center. EMS, like I said, it's 80% of our calls for service. Department responds as first responders along with Bi-County Ambulance, who provides our transport. And like I said, the majority of our calls concurrently are for EMS type calls. We have had a couple occasions though where they were structure fires. So I know one example this summer, we went right over the bridge to our neighbors to provide mutual aid. They were there no longer than 3 minutes, boom, we had a structure fire here in town. And so we're kind of left at a lull. Thankfully, Yuba City was listening. They responded over the bridge, mutual aid. They got to the structure fire, was able to contain it. But it's just that uneasy feeling. Anytime our staff goes away, they get very nervous because they don't know what's going to be left behind to protect the citizens of Marysville. Some of the solutions we've talked about, that quick attack unit where we could put 2 people on that unit, they could run around town all day long and provide EMS services. We're also looking at some collaboration with Rideout Hospital, where we might have a working relationship with some of their folks paired up with our folks to do some of this community care program stuff, or doing some of the work that's post and pre-hospital visit things that would reduce some of the call volume in a hospital. We can also increase the level of service for EMS that we provide. Currently we provide EMTs, emergency medical technicians. We could also, there's another component out there, a higher level, that's an advanced EMT. And then we also have a paramedic level person, which that's typically what's on the ambulance. With my background, I'm a firm believer in having that higher level of care. I think anytime you get 2 higher level of care people show up for a critical care patient, whether it's cardiac arrest, trauma related, having 2 higher level people working on that person gives them a much higher outcome of survival or recovery from that care. And we have some outdated EMS equipment. We just barely purchased a portable battery operated suction unit. And so if someone's got a compromised airway, maybe has vomited and they're kind of choking on their vomit, we now have a tool where we can go in and suction them much more efficiently. In the past, we had like a hand pump suction. And so watching someone try and squeeze that really hard, and it doesn't matter how hard you squeeze it, you only get so much out of that. But having these newer advanced tools today can again make our job easier and make the outcome for success on that patient much better. Having had used it on my son over the last couple of months, which probably saved his life, I can tell you simple tools like that that cost about $800 can make a difference between somebody living and dying. Evaluate the options for advanced levels of first responder care. Fire prevention, right now it's very reactionary. It's almost kind of complaint driven, or someone brings in a set of plans. We have inspections out there that we should be doing, state mandated, and we're struggling to do those right now. We've tried and been trying to fill this inspector position now for a while, and it's just struggling finding someone. We get someone almost there, just completed a background on someone. They called me literally that day and they backed out. So now I have to kind of start the process all over again. So we're trying really hard to fill that position so that we have some prevention work being done on a proactive basis and doing the things we're supposed to be doing out there. Right now our bureau has no organization. Right now there's nobody over there, and I'm trying to field in all of the stuff coming in right now with everything else that's going on. This year we have the California Fire Code adoption updates, so we'll have to adopt those codes. And so we may want to talk about any kind of amendments we want to add into that adoption. I'm a huge proponent of fire sprinklers. I know they reduce loss of property and they can save lives. And right now, we don't really have any adoption or amendments to have someone put in fire sprinklers unless they're mandatory by the fire code. So we may want to have a discussion about that. We have a lack of vegetation management program within our community. And I feel the real threat with my background that one day, it may not be a paradise outcome, but we have some of these areas of Thorn Tree, Hollywood Park, the cemetery areas where there's a lot of open space and vegetation there. on that same north windy day in October, November, you could get a running fire through there, have ember casting over the levees into dry areas, vacant lots, structures, and then have structure to structure to structure things happening. It could happen. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm just saying it's a potential that sometimes I don't sleep at night during those wind events like, oh gosh, what happens if? So we could institute some more robust vegetation management programs along with our in-town weed abatement lot enforcement, which we will be more proactive this year. So that's another area where we need some strength. So some of the solutions obviously is to fill that inspector position. We need to develop a comprehensive prevention plan and bureau to put in place. We need to develop a weed abatement program and some of that vegetation management program stuff. And then look at the California Fire Code and adopting that and any kind of amendments we want to put towards that as well. And then expanding prevention services to our surrounding region. Ironically enough, we're one of the few agencies that actually could say we would have a prevention program. Some of the other departments out there are not doing any prevention related responsibilities. And so we think we could, once we get stood up, we could offer a service to them and a fee for service, charge them for doing service out there. And it could extend all the way through the Yuba County area, through Linda and Olivehurst and Wheatland, and even potentially out into the casino once they stand up out there as well. So kind of coming to the wind down here, taking you all the way to the top, now we bring it back down for landing, the B2 out there at the Beale Air Force Base Experience. So our top priorities is one is to increase our staffing levels. That's huge to me. I want to sleep at night knowing that we can reduce the amount of concurrent calls that are happening, that when someone calls 911, we're going to have a fire resource show up at their door. That's important to me. Purchase a new fire engine, purchase that quick attack unit, replace our aging equipment. Those are those one-time expense items. And then improving our firehouse location down the road as we look for some type of opportunity that falls into our lap magically. Some of our revenue sources, this is where we're really busy at work behind the scenes trying to make stuff happen, is we have a contract with our district collaboration, D10 Hallwood, and so we're going to look at the fee that they pay versus the service they get and see if there needs to be any adjusting there. Also with Measure K potentially coming down, there could be some additional revenues coming into our D10 Hallwood district. So we want to be able to talk about how that might be well spent in some of our operations. Offering fee-based fire prevention services like we talked about. Use the strike team funds we get annually towards those one-time expenses, and also looking at how we can increase our admin rate that we currently charge the state. It's at the lowest that it can be at 10%. We know there's room to actually increase that up to even as low as 17%, up to 25%, which actually brings in a little bit more revenue on that state strike team things that we do annually. And seeking grants from OES, Yuba Water Agency, and then continued with the AFG stuff. We're talking about what a fee for service might look like, and there's different menu options that you can select, anything from medical aids, vehicle accidents, and I just talked to an individual this afternoon that they have the ability to charge for all fires and vehicle accidents. Sound a little bit promising, but they're going to do a little bit more exploring on what some of that would look like and costs that we could, or revenues that we could get from that. Collaborate with Rideout, Adventist, for a community care program and or possibly a transport. We've engaged them in one meeting. We're waiting for another meeting to be scheduled to talk about how we may be able to put some program together and sharing resources or potentially getting revenues for a service that we're offering with them to augment staffing or equipment type items. So we're seeking that as we speak. And then reimbursement for negligent fires. We actually instituted that this last summer. We had 2 different fire situations where we billed them for negligence on those fires, and it's going to be about $15,000 between those 2. So, it's maybe not a ton of money, but we've talked about ways already we could spend that money, whether it's putting it back into our vegetation management program that we would like to start, or doing things so we could actually put back into seeing, help reduce those fires that they're caused out there. Look at administrative contacts with, or contracts with some of our county folks. There was a study done some years ago to look at evaluating what any kind of contracts for service would look like or consolidation might look like. So I think it's time to go back to the table and look at revisiting that and seeing where that's at today, where we might be able to either gain revenues or reduce cost and some sharing of our resources. And offer public safety services to the private sector out there. The hotel, casino being a possibility of one of those. Update the city's outdated market fee schedule. So our permit fees, the fees we charge are severely outdated. And so we need to increase those fees that we would charge for any fire prevention stuff or permitting or fee for service charges. They really need to be updated. All right, and that's it in a nutshell. Any questions that I might be able to have Chris answer for
I think
you?
there's plenty of questions. I want to let the public know that we had the special meeting. I know many of you are here for the regular meeting. So we're going to continue on with some questions for our chief, but we'll get the regular meeting going as soon as possible. So thank you for those here for that. Questions from?
Through the chair.
Yes, sir.
You know, in past year, before you came on board with the team, we had a lot of discussions on first responder fees, and that kind of dropped by the wayside. Any progress on that or any action?
Like I stated, I had that phone call this afternoon. They actually are very eager to start up with us, and it could happen within a 2-week period of time if we chose to do that. I'll just give you a snapshot, and this is what they evaluated based on 2017 calls. It was in a neighborhood of about $60,000 of revenue generating. That's what they had looked at then. So they're going to do a new reevaluation based on last year's calls for service and see if anything changes there, and then send me some more data information about their program. But that's one company. It's fire service billing service, and they're out of Roseville. That's one option, but we've had some discussions, Marty and I, about if we were able to get into a relationship maybe with Rideout, that might be another opportunity to look at a billing service through them if we're already doing things collaboratively, especially through the EMS side of things. So I think we got a couple different venues or options. Looking at which one's going to be the most productive for us and benefit to us, I think will be important.
Yeah, with Highway 70 and 20 right in your backyard, that's a horrible thing, but it's a good revenue source.
Yeah.
I guess I want to ask also the council to keep in mind the chief's top priorities. Get a sense so the chief and staff and Marty understand what are some of the things that you could see maybe adding to the budget this year or in the future budgets, or how the, you know, things. He's added 5 things in here, so also take a look at that as you're giving comments and questions to folks, so staff kind of understand, okay, there seems to be some type of consensus on whatever particular priority. Sir?
On some of your revenue sources that you put into this, implementing the fee for service medical and seeking reimbursement for negligent fires, which sound real good, but are you able to collect those? Collecting them is going to be probably the bigger issue, right?
Collecting is a challenge, but like this service that I talked to today, you know, they factor that in. So they really only calculate their revenues on a 5% of the calls. So it's a pretty low, because they expect, you know, there's a lot you're not going to get paid on. So just on that 5% of our calls of that year equated to $60,000. So they take all that into consideration, and they do all the billings. They're the ones that go after the insurances, and they handle all that.
So it is paid through the insurance company, not through the particular.
Yeah, through this particular route. And so there's a couple different menu options you can choose, but through like fires and vehicle accidents specifically, your insurances have a slot there to pay for first responder fees. So right now, if you were to have an accident, they would have paid that fee, but if we don't ask for it, they don't pay it. And so they just keep those fees to themselves. They almost kind of like put it in a separate account, as I'm kind of describing.
But do we have to have a higher level of EMT to go after those
We can do it under the
issues?
current staffing model we have today. We don't have to upgrade for that.
You're gonna bring that back next council meeting so we can approve it?
I will do whatever my boss tells me to do.
I didn't ask you that.
Let's, any other comments?
Yeah, let's get it going, man. We've been after this for a year and a half.
Questions or comments, folks? Stephanie?
Question about the mutual aid in the area. How effective is that at addressing some of these things? Or is it something that we should really even take into consideration unless it was like a big emergency, like something way bigger?
Yeah, unfortunately, all the other agencies around us suffer from the same issues, mostly medical calls. And so we're hard pressed to call our neighbors for a medical aid backup. But if we have a fire, which everyone kind of, gentleman's handshake that if we have fires, we know none of us can handle on our own. So we all respond for fires. Mutual aid, a lot easier, but it's hard. But even like a vehicle accident, we can call for mutual aid for that. But it took us, they showed up just as we had taken a second patient out of the car and put them on a gurney. So it takes time.
Yeah.
To call their dispatch center, to get them on a road, for them to respond.
Right.
So even mutual aid, a lot of times, and that's why for medical aids, it's not very effective because, the ambulance will get there and maybe have transported away by the time somebody comes from Yuba City 10 minutes later, kind of a thing. So on fires, though, it's anticipated we'll be there for a longer period of time. So, they're going to get there and be able to help and support us. So mutual aid can be utilized in many things. It doesn't fit everything now.
Thank you.
Through the
Sir?
chair real quick. So more of a question than possibly a comment towards the end. Is your priority to increase the staffing and replace the equipment? Is that what the priorities that I'm kind of hearing you going? I mean, most of you probably know I got a little experience as a contractor working out of that house. I'm kind of curious where you want to go specifically.
So Marty tried to drill me down on this one too, and it's a hard one because it's kind of like two separate tracks. So we have multiple issues going on. So we need more people to go to calls. So we also need fire trucks to go to calls. So they're almost kind of both high priorities. Now, one can suffer longer and we can just, forego something another year, or in this case, building a fire truck could be 2 years, because if I wait one more year to say we could buy a fire truck, I'll get one 2 years from now. So some of it has to do with forecasting and planning. I could hire and put people on sooner and get them going to calls, but if I order a fire truck, that's another whole year out before we get it. So trying to be creative in how we balance that, how much do we get for what kind of an approach, but
Sure.
I can't really. Now, if I had to pick one, I'd say having people go to calls is more important to me, so that we make that call. Belaboring our fire truck issue just pushes the Band-Aid problem down the road as well.
Well, I would agree with that. I mean, staffing's always been an issue. I mean, there was a time that it used to be like 7-0 staffing, 7 people on a day at the firehouse, and then it went down to 4. In my time there that I spent there, 4 was very optimal. Being able to divide and conquer, as it sounds like you want to maybe acquire Quick Attack to put 2 people in each apparatus, or were you looking for NFPA standards for 3 people per apparatus, or?
Well, you give me some bodies, we'll figure out the best operational plan for
All
it,
right,
whether
fair
it's putting people on different
I
vehicles.
mean, I haven't had the conversation with you, so I'm just kind of curious where you're going with it. I do agree the 4L staff would be there. Also, with some institutional knowledge about the whole thing, I know that the last piece of equipment that the city actually bought apparatus-wise for the fire department was back in 1992, which was the current Quick Attack that you have. After that, everything was purchased via grant. Every fire apparatus was granted. And yes, there was matching funds inside of that from the city, but that was also for the breathing apparatus, the equipment, the turnouts, and all that stuff that has a shelf life.
Yep.
So that's why I had a little more curious as to where you're going for the equipment or the personnel, because there's only so much in a pot.
Sure.
So it's kind of
And ultimately, we'll give you more recommendations down the road as we start to filter things out, and then you can kind of tell us what you see as our priorities and see if they're hopefully in alignment.
on top of that. Thank you, Chief. It was a good presentation. I appreciate the information.
Thank you.
Sir?
Got one more question. Where you got your priorities listed, which is somewhat what he was talking about, it seems like a Quick Attack unit would be the next piece of equipment that would give you the most relief.
It would. It would help in many ways. It's a cheaper investment. It would relieve some pressure on our existing engine. And if I got folks on that to run on what is 80% of our calls, like today, it's been all medical aids, so 8 calls were medical aids. So I've got a $750,000 engine running down these roads, getting beat up, to 8 medical aids all over town. So something of a smaller quick attack could definitely, help reduce our issue problem with our existing fire truck.
What does a reasonably loaded quick attack unit go for nowadays?
200,000?
Reasonable, I mean, I don't know, equipped?
Yeah, I mean, equipped, ready to go, serviceable, 200,000. Linda, next door to us, is building one that I've been keeping my eye on. So watching how they've been building it and the cost of it.
And those are kind of one-time kind of costs for folks to think about as cannabis dollars are coming around. We can possibly use those dollars for one-time type of, expenses. I am interested in a couple of things. I think there's always opportunities to go after a lot of funding, other sources of funding, whether it's grants or trying to beef up your staffing through volunteer programs, but all that takes administrative work. So it's kind of a chicken and egg in my mind. Not only do you need additional bodies to go out for calls, but you need an additional administrative support, so you're going to be able to do going after grants, going to volunteers, dealing with HR issues, whatever it may be, right? I mean, you need that additional, in my mind, as a manager, I'm thinking you need additional that to be able to provide a memo to a council next week, so so you can have the numbers ready and everything. That takes a lot of time and administrative things and efforts and all that stuff. The increasing staff levels going 4.0, I imagine that's another, I'm just going straight cost. That's probably another $300,000 to get a 4.0, right? For 3 shifts. So we got to think it's sustainable. Is that a sustainable amount of dollars that we could do for the next whatever number of years, so 5 years or whatever? Remember, we received that training that workshop last week. It kind of gave us that tool, right? We're going to have a tool now that we'll be able to kind of maybe pump some of these dollar amounts into the system that we paid for. So think about that as well. Can we cover $300,000 on an annual basis? Plus, you probably need another $100,000 for that manager or whatever it may be that you're looking for, right? So that's $400,000. Can we sustain that for our fire department? Not even thinking about wages. Quick attack, I think in my mind, as we're talking about reserve funds, can we create one specifically for the fire department? That's another, as last week we also looked at different funds and how things can be allocated. So think about that as well as we're looking forward. But in my mind, what you need is additional administrative, so you can do some of these asks from the council, from whoever, or to go after more funding.
I'd love to hug you right now.
Huh?
I just want to hug you right now.
Okay, well, sorry. But you do, because you need that additional, support to do your day-to-day stuff to kind of keep the train moving. You can't do it both. You can't assist the calls and be the administrator unless, you have 24 hours of work. So for me, I support that, looking at ways that we can maybe, and I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts about that.
Through the chair real quick.
Yes, sir.
Just one more question that I have. I'm fully aware that the fee schedule for services should probably be addressed and changed over time and so forth, because it's kind of antiquated in a little bit of way. But I mean, I also understand what your predecessor's thoughts were on some of the fee schedule aspects in regards to certain businesses having what was considered hazardous materials in their business, therefore it was at the top level of that fee schedule for the local businesses. Do you have a model? Is it the same model, something you've created, or are you adopting what was done prior to your arrival?
We've talked about this, Mario and I, about, some of the stuff needs to be like consultant driven to do some evaluations on the standard out there and what's actually happening and get up to best practices and not really create some third wheel, my own thing.
Right. I mean, my only concern was that, the businesses, and most of the fees are borne on the backs of businesses. So it was just a thought I had to ask about that schedule that I was aware of last year. And it was like, oh no, awesome, not. So.
And I guess that's another way to play for an administrator role is the fee reimbursement. I mean, because you can't make money off it, but you can reimburse so we can, for those services. again, even putting together tables for fees, it's gonna take an administrative role.
It does. It does. Thanks, Chief, appreciate it.
Any other thoughts? I mean, I don't want to be the only one speaking about money, but really think about, as we're talking about putting together the budget, staff needs to hear kind of feedback, you know, if Marty's going to try to look for $300,000 or $400,000 out of the budget, you know, we don't want to come back, you know, in June and say, no, we really didn't want that. So, yes, go ahead.
We definitely have deficiencies in the fire department that we need to take care of. So I think that we've done a good job taking care of our fire department, and I think really it's time to address the needs that he's listed here and he's mentioned, and because our firefighters aren't even safe, basically, when they're fighting fires with outdated equipment, breathing apparatus, all those kinds of things. I mean, that's got to be a priority for us. And I like the idea of having the quick attack unit, having a couple of guys on that to be able to respond to all those calls and reduce the wear and tear on the big engine. So yeah, I definitely think that we need to put some money in the fire department direction this year.
I was, again, and even creating the relationships with the JPA, whether we do additional training. Again, I'm going back to the administrator. In my mind, you need that additional support for the fire chief to be able to provide some of those additional, you know, enhance the capacity of our firefighters, you know, even signing up for a conference. I don't know, you probably have some support there, but.
Yeah, Marty supports me greatly in that area, and I would just say I would love to have a assistant type person to help me with that stuff, and I appreciate that. But my higher priority is putting people on the engines to go to calls so I can sleep better at night when I do get to sleep.
Okay.
So just to keep it in perspective, I mean, I know as we spend more and more and more money and it gets bigger, those priorities in my mind need to go towards those folks to help our folks currently help them stay sane.
Through the chair.
Yes.
You know, it's always nice to be able to say, yes, we can do all this, we have the money. I think it's going to depend on our revenue at the beginning of the year. We have no idea what revenue we're going to have and how much it hopefully and will improve. But I would be the first to say, buy you a new engine, chief, and get you an assistant. But the reality is, we don't know what our revenue is going to be, and so we have to work through that.
Sure.
But I appreciate your open-mindedness about looking for collaborations, whether it's the hospital or whoever, you know, if we can sell some of these services out to whether it's the public sector or other agencies, you know, try to, you know, I know you're also looking at savings, you're not just looking at additional costs, but so I appreciate that, and your presentation showed that you're going to be looking for other ways to generate dollars outside of just the general fund.
My experience has been is to get ahead is to be creative, and so finding these other avenues that haven't been tapped into that are things that we have opportunity to get into, that's where we'll start to see additional gains.
Go back to the boots.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marty.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. One of the things is the chief and I have been working on his presentation together in his white paper. We realized that there are lots of ideas for revenue generation and cost savings, and some of them are really outside of our bailiwick as individuals to just, it isn't just run to the finance director, crunch some numbers, is this a good idea? And so I think that, you know, one of the things we're hoping for some support on is probably coming back with a request for funding for a consultant that can help us look at the entire picture and all the moving parts and all the different ideas for revenue generation and cost savings. And I have worked with a firm like that before, and Ron also has some ideas as well. So, because, you know, between, you know, fire inspection and ramping that up and going out and charging for service and charging negligent calls and all of those kinds of things have a lot of assessment that really needs to be done to figure out what's the sweet spot for all of that and what can we actually manage and what revenue will really come in and genuinely we will, you know, generate so that we can make sure that we're staying on budget and being sustainable, as you just pointed out, Mayor Semio. So I think that's something that we're probably going to be coming back to, because we feel like there's a lot of moving parts to these different ideas that we have. And I think there's some really good people out there that can help us figure out what's the best solution for the city overall.
And can we do that in a regional approach? I mean, can we bring some of our sister agencies to kind of participate in that kind of analysis?
I believe so. Like I said before, there's already been a study that was done by
Correct.
Citygate that looked at all agencies. So we're having a meeting tomorrow where I'm going to kind of bring back forward again and see where we might be able to get some traction to reevaluate, look at those things again and see if we might be able to partner and even doing some of these, you know, consulting, get the document back up to currency again.
Okay, good. Any other comments or questions?
Good job, Chief.
Thank you, sir. Then we'll adjourn to our regular meeting at 6 p.m., anticipated 6:30, and it looks like we're on, are we on time? So I'm gonna take maybe, give Persephone 5 minutes to change the disc, so you have 5 minutes, but let's get back here so we can get our business done. So we'll take a 5-minute break.
Thank you for being on.